Today is one of those conversations where whether you are 5 years old, you are 55 years old, or you are 105 years old, this conversation is significant. Whether your life is great for you right now, maybe you just got a promotion, maybe you just got back from your honeymoon, maybe you just got into the college of your dreams, maybe you are a Patriots or a Rams fan, and today is a good day for you. Or whether life is really hard right now. Maybe you're a New Orleans Saints fan, and that is wrong. Our hearts go out to you. But whether you have grown up in church, you've been a part of church for a long time, maybe you're brand new to church, or maybe you're here and you've honestly kind of written it off, but you're here for a family member or a friend today to make them happy, however it is that you got here. Today's conversation is absolutely crucial. And as I was preparing for today and trying to think about what is it that makes groups so important, why is it that we get so excited and so passionate about, of all the things we could talk about, why is it always at the top of the list? One of the things that's clarifying for me to think about why something is significant is to think about the absence of it, to think about the opposite, to think about a world where it doesn't exist. And the opposite of groups, the opposite of connection, the opposite of community is isolation, it's separation, it's loneliness. And as I was preparing for this week and doing some research, I came across the work of this individual right here. Her name is Tracy Crouch. I don't know if we have any Tracy Crouch fans in the crowd, but Tracy is a member of British Parliament, and she has held some impressive titles simultaneously, all at the same time. She is the Minister of Civil Society, the Minister of Sports, and the Minister of Gambling, which is pretty cool. I think we could take some notes. But she's the minister of those three things, and in 2018, she became the world's first Minister of Loneliness. The government identified loneliness as such an epidemic, such a growing issue in their context, that they said, we want to address this at the highest level and get serious about it because it's having such detrimental effects on our community and on our society. Then I saw article after article after article, headline after headline after headline. And when you look at some of these, it's fascinating. One was Surgeon General says there's a loneliness epidemic. This was the Washington Post. And in here, this is a former Surgeon General that talks about the fact that the rate of loneliness is increasing at twice the speed that it did just 20 years ago. And he argues it is the greatest current threat to our health as a society, yet it's the thing that we're not talking about. It's the thing that we're not doing anything to address. This next article, this next headline said, young people report more loneliness than the elderly. Historically speaking, the oldest generation alive has always been the loneliest generation simply because of the fact that there are the least number of people alive that can relate with and understand that stage of life. Today, the loneliest age group is 16 to 24. Followed closely by middle-aged, about 45. It is fascinating to think about how things are changing. Here's another headline. The biggest threat facing middle-aged men isn't smoking or obesity, it's loneliness. This was by the Boston Globe. This was everywhere. There were TED Talks on this. There was an incredible Oxford study on this that said loneliness is more detrimental to your health than obesity. And it's on par with smoking 15 cigarettes a day. That is an amazing statistic if that is half true, to think about and consider how that could be affecting our lives. And the reason that is, it was talked about in this last article. This is a New York Times one that talked about how social isolation is killing us, that we are literally dying younger as a result. But the reason it's so significant is because the effects on your body, the effect on your heart, the effect on your mind, and then when you sleep less as a result of anxiety and depression associated with loneliness, the decisions that you make when you are lonely, and the things that you try to do to feel different when you are lonely, all play into this equation of this incredibly important and quickly rising issue in our world, our society, and in our culture. I wish that I could say when I looked at all these headlines and articles and stuff that I was totally shocked and surprised by that, but it wouldn't really be authentic because for me, I think mainly because of the last 10 years being a part of our student ministry, this is something that we see and are trying to address and fight on a regular basis. When you think about what high schoolers experience today, They're in school 40 hours a week. That's a full-time job that they don't get paid for. Then you put homework and tests and projects on top of that. Because they don't get paid, a lot of them try to get jobs. And now, unless you are the top of your class, you can't get into any of these competitive colleges anymore without a very well-rounded resume. So now you've got to get in all of these organizations, all of these clubs, play sports, maybe sports outside of school as well, in band, whatever it might be. Our high schoolers are constantly exhausted, drained, and their schedules are so packed and busy that there is not any kind of built-in rhythm to pause and authentically connect in a real way with one another. But this isn't just the next generation. It's not just students coming up. This is an adult thing as well. In fact, every type of numbing mechanism available to us to make us feel different is on the rise. Alcohol use is on the rise. Drug use is on the rise. Screen time, any kind of screen time, watching anything is on the rise. We eat more than we ever have. We spend more than we ever have. All of those things are rising at once, which makes you want to ask, what is the underlying reason, or what is the underlying issue? Not only that, not just the experience here and with ministry and those kinds of statistics, but personally, this is something that didn't totally shock me as well. I've shared some of these examples, if you've been a part of North Point for a little while before, of some of the stories or some of the moments or conversations that I've personally had with my counselor. I started counseling about 4 years ago now, and at that time it was more of a preventative thing, more of trying to become more self-aware and know myself and how I react and respond and all of these different kinds of things. But I started this conversation a little over 4 years ago, and the reason was that my anxiety was higher, my stress level was higher, I wasn't sleeping well at all, I was tired all the time. The ways that I was responding to people, the things that Emily was reflecting back to me about how I would respond and when she would open up and different things, I was like, man, I have a desire to get to know what's happening and know more about myself. And what my counselor quickly identified in our conversations, and I won't share 4 years with you and bore you guys and all that kind of stuff, but was how much of these kinds of things were directly associated with and caused by loneliness. And there were a couple of big reasons that we identified, and some of these are just, kind of my, story or my puzzle pieces, if you will, and then we've all got our own versions of this. But one of the big reasons was right when I graduated, tried to do the adulting thing for the first time from college, and I took a job here at North Point. And this is in no way, shape, or form like a feel bad for me thing or anything. This is just my story. I hope to do this for the rest of my life. I love what I do, but working at a church can be a little bit of an isolating experience. When you meet somebody new and the conversation goes to, what do you do? And you tell them that you work for a church or you're a pastor, the conversation changes pretty quickly. Becomes kind of a lonely experience. Usually, one of three things will happen. If you want like a fun, date night or social experiment, just next time you meet a stranger, tell them you work for a church and just watch how they respond. But usually one of three things, will happen. One, there will be this kind of new standard put on me, like they're evaluating everything I do or say, right? Because now there's this kind of moral perfection that I'm supposed to hit and live up to and be all the time, right? So I feel this kind of pressure from them. Then the second thing that'll be kind of interesting is they'll start to kind of validate some things in their own life. They'll be like, oh yeah, well I went to church here, X amount of years ago and reading my Bible and blah, blah, blah. And they'll just kind of share this because that's what I want to hear apparently. And we'll start to share these things. And usually what will happen 30 minutes later, it's always later in the conversation, we'll be talking about something separate. We'll talk about, the Super Bowl or whatever. And then they'll bring up something they said before they knew that I worked for a church. And they'll be like, hey, that thing I said earlier, I don't usually use that kind of language. I just want you to know, and I don't normally get drunk like that. That was that one story, but that's not a common. And I'm it's really okay. Thanks for sharing. So that will kind of happen a lot. I'll experience, some of that on the other side of people. The other thing that people will do is you can just pick up on it so quick. People will just act differently. It'll just be very obvious to me that they don't feel like they can be their authentic self anymore, which is kind of an isolating experience. The really silly one, that happened recently. It's just such a small example of this, but I walked into the garage, which is our student space for our middle schoolers on the other side of the building, and the timing was just perfect. Well, I walked into the room, perfect for me, not perfect for the student, but I walked into this room, and this high school girl drops a word that you probably don't want to say in front of your pastor, 4-letter word. And she says this in a statement, and immediately like makes eye contact with me as I walk in, breaks down in tears, sits down on the couch with her head in her hand, and just like bawls her eyes out. I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. I use that word too much. I'm so, all this kind of stuff. Her small group leader was in the room. Like, she had no problem with talking like in front of her old small group leader, saying that. But when I walked in, it was like, hey, I know this is kind of how I act, but I can't act this way in front of you. And it's funny and it's cute, but there's these little things that happen like that where it's like, I don't know if I can be me in front of you. So that was one of the things that we identified that maybe I didn't, foresee coming into the role. And then personally as well, I've shared this part of my story before also, but Emily, my wife, her mom passed away when Emily was 10 years old. She passed away from cancer. Emily has no siblings, so the only immediate member of her family when we got married was her dad. 6 months into our first year of marriage, her dad has a massive stroke and passes away. And so for us, we just felt like that first year of marriage was different for us. Our friends in a similar stage of life, like we just didn't feel that we could connect in the same way. We didn't really feel like they understood what it was that we were going through. It was even isolating for us. There were some things that were connective about it, but other things that I just couldn't understand her world. I couldn't fix it, so I would withdraw and all of these different kinds of things. And so there were a series of events that kind of highlighted that gap in my life. But at first, I thought that was just a me thing or something, and quickly realized that's not how it goes. For any of you, whatever your kind of puzzle pieces are to the story, as your life gets more complex, it becomes more and more natural to feel or experience as if others don't get you, don't really know what's going on inside of you, don't really understand why you are the way you are, how you feel, or all of these different kinds of things. It's very natural. And what I discovered on the other side of Buck, our lead pastor, on the other side of my counselors, that so many of these kind of habits, behaviors, the anxiety, the stress, the sleep, all this kind of stuff was really directly connected to either a fear of loneliness, a fear of being alone, the fear of the way I would connect, or a symptom of loneliness. So, a stress of being on stage and, it goes terrible and I'm rejected and I'm not good enough and all this kind of stuff is actually a fear of being alone. The symptom of loneliness would be, hey, I want to feel different, so I want to do something to feel different. For me, I didn't know for a long time that was underneath the surface. I was like, I need to sleep different. I need to eat something different. I need to work out more, whatever it might be. And for me, this was really clarifying to come to the conclusion. I love the way that this pastor, his name is Jeremy Linneman, and he said it could be easily argued that loneliness is the epidemic of contemporary Western culture, and most of our other epidemics, from heart disease to pornography use, can trace their roots back to a lonely heart. When you think about all of these things that are on the rise, all of these numbing mechanisms, could it be that underneath the surface of that, we are in one of the loneliest and most isolated cultures that really has ever lived? I like the way he points to a why underneath it. That's a little bit on the significance of or importance of the conversation. I want to clarify a little bit what loneliness actually is and is not, because being alone is not the same as being lonely, right? Being alone and being lonely are not the same, meaning you can be in a room physically by yourself. Being alone has to do with being physically isolated. You can be in a room by yourself and not feel lonely. You can also be in a room full of people and feel very lonely. For some of you, that may be why church is difficult for you, because it highlights a relationship or a gap or a loneliness in your life. You could feel that right now here in this room. Those are two different things. Being lonely has to do with an emotional, a relational, perhaps a spiritual isolation. Another thing is that anyone can be affected by loneliness because of its relative nature. You may see somebody that's really extroverted, seems like they have a lot of friends and connections, and you have no idea how lonely they actually are. Because if the way you were raised, your wiring, what gives you energy, all that kind of stuff, you feel like you should have two people that really know you, that you can really connect with, that get you, they're your safe space, and you only have one friend, or you have zero, you're going to feel that loneliness gap in a real way. If you think that number should be 50 and you have 45, there's going to be a gap in that space where you feel those same kind of symptoms, those same kinds of feelings and experiences. The last one that was extraordinarily helpful for me, and maybe it is for you as well, is that you may not actually know that you are lonely. So For me, if you asked me to fill out some kind of survey or something, zero to 10, how lonely do you feel? I mean, I would have been way low on that. I was in a fraternity when I started in counseling. I had 8 roommates. I was dating Emily. I mean, I didn't feel like, I'm lonely or don't have friends or anything like that. And what I realized is how few people actually knew me, not because of bad people around me, but because of how little I would let people in and let people really know me. So you may feel like, gosh, that's not my thing, but we don't actually realize what is underneath that. There was an amazing study, an amazing statistic that said 1 in 4 people haven't had a significant, meaningful conversation in the last 6 months. This study had a kind of a definition of what that means. But basically, for a 6-month stretch, conversations are just, what's for dinner? What's the schedule? Who's picking up the kids? And that's kind of like, did you see the game? That's kind of where we just stay and operate out of habit. And it's easy to stay there and not go beneath that. There's all kinds of reasons now that we could talk about for the why this is, why we might be one of the loneliest cultures that has ever lived. And there's a lot of stuff on that. A lot of psychologists, a lot of historians have looked at how individualistic our society is and how communal the rest of human history really has been. But I don't know that that's helpful. I want to talk about one idea that you could actually do something about. And the reason or the why for our loneliness and why it's on the rise that I want to talk about is what we're going to call, for the sake of this morning, the loneliness gap. And the loneliness gap is this: we all want to be known for something. I don't mean like big life plan dream. This isn't that kind of a conversation. I just mean you want to be known as a good mom. You want to be known as a good dad, a good parent. You want to be known as a good husband or wife. You want people to see you and think something about you. Maybe it's that you're a good professional or you're put together or whatever it may be. You may even have some subconscious ones that you're not super aware of. You want to achieve or be successful because you're trying to prove something to somebody. You want people to see you as smart or competent or whatever it may be. But there are just things that we want people to think about us. Supernatural, nothing. It is very natural, not supernatural. It's a very healthy kind of thing. But, for you, when you think about it, well, what do you want to be known for? I mean, when you try and answer that question for yourself, what would you like people to say about you? How would you like people to perceive you? See, when you have that in your mind, the space between where we want people to think about us, how we want people to perceive us, and how we perceive ourselves, that space is the loneliness gap. Maybe people do see you this way, and it makes you feel even lonelier because you feel like you're a hypocrite or not that, or it's the way you want people to see you. But then how you actually are, how you think about yourself in that space is a space of where you think, man, people really don't know me. Do you know what you do when you don't measure up? We pretty much all do the same thing, and what we do in that space, in that gap, is we pretend. I'm not calling us all inauthentic or liars or hypocrites or whatever. It's a very natural thing to do. But perhaps for you, this is in your workplace. Maybe for you, 40 hours of your week or more are in an environment in a workplace where you feel like you can't be yourself. That's not how you normally talk. You can't give your opinions. Your attitude has to change. And we put it under the umbrella of professionalism. That is our culture a little bit. But in reality, we feel like we can't be ourselves at work. Maybe there's a certain family member that you tread lightly around and you act differently around because you don't want to say something that is going to set them off. Maybe it's around the parents of your kids' friends. And when you're with them, you want them to see the way that you're parenting and that you are a great parent. I mean, there are all these environments, and it's very, very natural, but there's all these environments where we pretend and we want people to see kind of our ideal or how we want them to think of us. What is interesting, an interesting addition to this conversation, is the world of social media, because all that does is highlight it. It adds fuel to the fire. I think a great example for me personally of just such a small, subtle gap to show you how tiny the addition to the gap can be every day. But a personal one for me is this. This past week was Emily and I's 3rd anniversary. We've been together about 10 years now, but we've been married for 3. And on our anniversary, I posted this. I'm not great at social media. This is too big of a caption probably to be considered a good one. But I said, get you a girl that looks at your dog the way you look at her, because that's pretty much our relationship right there. I'm obsessed with her, and she's obsessed with our dog. That's kind of how it goes. And And then what I said, and this is my attempt at, being sweet, I said, people call your wedding day the best day of your life, but 3 years ago, I didn't have these last 3 years of memories with her, so today is better. Happy anniversary, babe. I love you. And then she said, I love you, which, just made me really happy. So that was the post, from last week. Then as I looked at that, and I was, preparing for today even, the gap came up a little bit for me, and here's why. Because as I looked at that, I was just wondering, what do people think when they look at that? Do people think, wow, like, look at this, happy couple, perfect family, whatever? How many students think that, looking up to, and that's what we want to be or something? Or how many people think that's what I was trying to portray, and that's what I was trying to communicate is, hey, look at our sweet, happy family? But what I know, looking at this post now that you don't know, but you're about to know, is that a couple of days after this post, on our 3rd anniversary, we had our weekly meeting. We do this every week on Mondays, and we just talk about the important things, maybe not the most exciting things, but the important things in our relationship. And something came up in that conversation that we didn't see eye to eye on. And Emily shared how she felt about that, and based on the way I responded, our night ended in tears for her. That was the majority of our conversation. On our anniversary itself, I had an early morning meeting, and then I was working late that night. I came back after she was asleep, and I saw her for probably about an hour on our anniversary. This post was probably the sweetest thing I did that day. And when I look at this picture, for me, I feel the gap. Because the way I feel, whether this is true or not, that's not even what's important, but the way I feel is, gosh, you're a workaholic husband that isn't present to support and be there for your wife, especially in important moments like this. And that's what I feel when I post it. Now, the difference in that space is that gap of loneliness. That is a small, subtle example of how quickly that can happen in our everyday life. For me, that would be one place that there's a gap. A place that the gap is very common for me is any time I speak on stage, because I feel the pressure every single time when I'm speaking to an ideal, that if my life deviates from that at all, what I'm speaking to, if I live any differently, which happens all the time, then there's a gap of loneliness for me. But I wonder what it is for you, because as I've certainly discovered, that is not unique to me or this role or this position. That is true for all of us. I wonder what the gap is for you. Is it that you're, a stay-at-home parent, and now it is difficult to find your social circle and communication because of how much that takes up for you? Is it that your only network really is work and home, but there's nobody that actually knows you? Is it social media related? I mean, there's so many gaps that it could be for us, but the reality is that we all want to be known for something. It's a desire we all have, and it's perfectly fine. But it's not what we need. What we need is to be known by someone. What we really need is for somebody to know us as we are, not as we should be. And as they discover us, that moment of connection is what overcomes the loneliness gap. Here's what's so interesting, though. Where we tend to pretend the most, you know where that is, or at least in my opinion, I think you might agree with me. Where we tend to pretend the most is the church, right? Think about this. Just think about the fact that the phrase exists. Can you say that in church, right? You've never said that about a bar. Can you say that at a bar? I'm not sure. But you say that in church all the time. You walk in the doors, and you may have been in a fight with your family, with your kids, with your spouse. You might have been yelling at each other, but we walk in the doors. Man, we're smiling. We're holding hands. And it's all good for about 65 minutes until we get back in the car and we can re-engage. And but that's just what we're going to show people when we're here and we're around, right? There's this ideal that we think we're supposed to do or behave or talk like or act or treat each other, what kind of parents or what kind of spouse. And as a result, we end up pretending in the gap. You know what's fascinating about that to me, though? You know where we're supposed to pretend the least? The church. That's where we're supposed to. And you may not believe me on that. Hopefully I can convince you of that. But this is supposed to be the place in the environment where we can be our most authentic self and know that we are unconditionally accepted here and have a place that we can belong. The reason you know that is because of what the New Testament writers write to the early church and what they say over and over again, and the examples they give us. They are so clear that of anywhere in the world, if you are going to be you, if you are going to be your authentic self, if you're going to find connection anywhere, it's got to start here in this place. You see James, who is the brother of Jesus. He's kind of like the pastor of First Jerusalem Church. You see First Baptist, First Methodist, whatever. He's the pastor of the church of Jerusalem, and he is writing this about what the church is supposed to be and look like. And he says this, he says, "Therefore, confess your sins to each other and pray for each other that you may be healed." If we were to do this, I mean, we could do this in, a minute from now. We could all stand up, and then you could find somebody else in the room that you don't know yet and go ahead and share your darkest, deepest secret with them. And I would recommend you go second. Go ahead and, let them go first. But, I mean, we could do that, but we know that we're never going to do that in this setting. That's not possible here in Rose. But what James is saying is that when somebody on the outside of you discovers what's really happening on the inside of you, there is something connective, there's something restorative, there's something healing about that process. Here's another early pastor, the author of Hebrews, who says, "And let us consider how we may spur one another on toward love and good deeds." He says, hey, we should encourage one another towards these loving actions towards one another. This is not talking about some kind of stage setting like this where somebody with the microphone encourages you to go love and engage in these good deeds. He's saying encourage one another, that this is a responsibility for each of us to lift each other up and encourage each other in this way. And then in the next verse in Galatians, Paul says, "Brothers and sisters, if someone is caught in a sin, you who live by the Spirit should restore that person gently." In other words, you can't do that with somebody that you don't know. That's not you catch somebody out in the hallway and you corner them and say, "Don't you know?" You can't do that on a Facebook post and say, "Hey, here's how you should," or "Here's what you can," or "Here's all this." That's not gently. That implies a relationship. That implies trust. That implies connection. It implies that you're on the other side of somebody that you know has their best intentions in mind, that they want the best for you, that they love you. That's what that is referring to. And then it gets even more significant in the next verse, because Paul says, "Carry each other's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ." You want to know how to make kind of the whole Bible happen? You want to know all those commands, how they all come together? Just carry each other's burdens. Support one another. And Jesus summarizes that as love one another. In John 13 at the Last Supper, he says, hey, let's take all these commands, a new command I give you, love one another as you have loved me, as I have loved you. So if you are ever in doubt, what are you supposed to do in this scenario? What does the Bible say? What is Christianity? If you are ever in doubt, your litmus test is, what does love require of me? Love one another as I have loved you. He says, when you carry each other's burdens, which is not something we can do here in Rose, he says, when you do that, you fulfill the law of Christ. Then Paul says in Romans, accept one another. Then, just as Christ accepted you. Do you know why God has accepted you just as you are and not as you should be? Because he loves you unconditionally. Because he sent his son for you. And because he has incredible plans for you. He wants the best for you. We accept one another as we are so that we can encourage one another, so that we can spur one another on towards love and good deeds, so that we can carry each other's burdens. That's not something you can do with strangers, with people that you don't know, with some kind of fake compliment to somebody you just met. This is authentic relationship. This is in a different environment than what you see here in this room. That one another comment that you see right here, statement, this phrase shows up 100 times over the course of the New Testament. We're given 100 commands to one another, encourage one another, support one another, love one another, pray for one another. There's 100 different commands, none of which we can do here in these rows. We can't be the church if this is the only context in which we exist. I want to share one last insight with you, at least from my personal kind of story that was helpful to me, and maybe it'll be helpful to you as we kind of move forward towards finishing our conversation. One of the things that both Buck and my counselor that I referenced were so clarifying on and helpful and bold with me about was they were very clear to say, you, Jordan, have the ability to address the loneliness gap. That nobody is going to magically show up in your life and just know all of these things that are happening in your life, all the things that you do. Maybe people don't understand what you do week to week, but you could share that with them. You could inform them. You could try. You could put yourself in a position where you have the opportunity to make meaningful connections with others. You have the ability to engage that. And the place, the opportunity that is most suitable for us doing exactly that is what we've talked about from the very beginning here at North Point. If you've been with us for a while, you've heard us say this phrase all the time. Something we've said since day one is that circles are better than rows. This is coming from somebody who is passionate about what happens in rows. I love to communicate. It is one of the greatest honors of my life to get up here and speak. But what happens in this room is not where life change really happens. If you show up Sunday to Sunday to Sunday and say, I'm not really growing, and this is the only context that you're in, we just can't be the church here only in this setting. Circles allow the opportunity for real connection. Circles are where you grow further, faster. Circles are where we come alongside one another, support one another, know one another, encourage one another. And so, with these next couple slides, my hope is to hit everybody in the room. I hope I hit that with these next three. If you are leading a circle, okay, so maybe that's Wambaland, Upstreet, Transit, Inside Out, where you lead a community group. What I would like to say to you here in this moment is thank you. I honestly, I know how biased, I get it. I'm very biased, but I can't think of very much in the world that is more significant than what you do on a weekly basis to create safe places for people to connect in an authentic way with one another, to grow with each other, to grow as people, and to potentially grow in their relationship with Christ. I just can't think of very many things in the world more significant than what you do. And I know it's a sacrifice, and some of you give up your homes, and all of you give up your time and energy, and it's outside of just the group as well, and I know what that is, but what you do, like, you make North Point happen, so thank you. To those of you that are in a circle, you're a part of a group, my encouragement to you, my hope, is that you continue to one another, that you continue to encourage, that you continue to carry each other's burdens, that you continue to support, that you continue to laugh with, that you continue to love one another. I've been a part of groups now for the past 10 years. I was never in a group before North Point. I didn't go to church before North Point, and so I showed up, and I was scared and skeptical of my high school group in Inside Out when I showed up, and I thought it'd be weird. I thought we'd have to talk about things, and I thought I wouldn't know anything, and I was really nervous. And it was an experience that changed my life. Half of my small group was in my wedding. I still meet with my small group leader today on a regular basis. Then I was a part of our first college group that we had here at North Point. I've been a part of a couple community groups since, and I can't imagine going through life. The good moments would not be as fun, but I can't imagine the hard moments. I can't imagine what Emily and I went through without people that are there for us that actually really know us. But even with that, I'll be honest and authentic and trying to be the whole time up here today. I know that there are days where you just may not want to. There are times where it sounds really exciting to go to group and you look forward to it and you look excited to be with your people. And there's other times where, man, that just sounds like homework. It sounds like a cost. It sounds like, can we text in sick? Can you be sick or I sick or maybe the kids are sick? You can do that. And I get it. I understand that. I just think long term, the cost of disengaging is higher than the cost of engaging. It's higher than the cost of reorganizing your busy schedule. I know you are all busy. I'm not trying to minimize that. We're all busy here in the room. I know there's fears with it. I know all of that kind of stuff, but you don't lose anything with trying a group out or trying to engage. For those of you that are in a group, this is such an incredible thing to be a part of, and don't ever give up on it. Here's the last one. To those of you who are not in a group, would you consider thinking about what it looks like to close the gap? Would you consider thinking about what it looks like to engage in a group? What could be possible? It doesn't cost you anything to try a couple, to see it. Dating, sometimes groups are sometimes like dating. We'll say that hey, you might have a bad experience, but just try out another group. Would you give it a shot because of what could be hanging in the balance of those types of connections? Our bottom line is lonely kills, Don't die. Get in a group. I felt like that would be simplest. Thank you. Thank you. Here's the real one. We want to be known for something. It's true for every single one of us. There's nothing wrong with that. But we need to be known by someone. What is hanging in the balance of being known by someone could be absolutely extraordinary. And rather than me talk you through the process of what that would actually look like to consider being part of a group, taking a step, or even just learning more about it, rather than me doing that, it would be much better for you guys to actually get to hear from our groups director himself, who's been up here today already, and that's Shane Norcross. So Shane, if you would come hang with us, man. And I've always wondered, I've always been curious, you guys, on maybe y'all's opinion, do you think Shane's doppelganger is Charlie Day from It's Always Sunny? Does anybody feel that, for those of y'all that know Shane?
Do you really think I look like that? Man, that must be one good-looking fella.
Yes, you got that same deep, manly voice that he does too. So.
It's funny you say that. I wish I had a nickel for every time I went through drive-through for when somebody called me ma'am when I ordered food. It's fantastic.
I totally believe that.
Oh, well, thank you, Jordan.
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
Sorry, we share a wall, like a closet kind of wall extension. That's our offices.
Yeah,
so
we have offices that are about, I think, this big. As big as this table.
We're really valued here.
Yeah,
so
truly, we really are.
Totally. Anyways, thank you for coming out here.
You're welcome.
Being willing to get up here. And my first legitimate question for you is, what does it actually look like to be a part of a group on a kind of practical level?
That is a great question, and I first just want to reiterate the why behind community. The only reason why I'm up here is because community group actually changed my life. My life was going on a different direction, and group is what got me on track. And we want to make faith as practical as possible for people, and we think the best way to do that is surround people with other folks that are just trying to do life like they are. It's the place where people are encouraged to grow in their faith. It's the place where we can celebrate the successes and wins in life, and also have a place where we can find support and comfort when we're going through some really tough times. And people always ask, so how often do groups meet? And our groups usually meet about once a week. And at a group meeting, there's an upfront social time. There's usually food involved, like chicken wings. There's a study time. Some of our groups will spend time just diving deeper into Sunday's messages, or choosing a topic that's relevant to the group and where they're at in life. And then there's a time of prayer. And our community groups last anywhere from 1 to 2 years. And that doesn't mean the first time you show up to a group, you've got to commit to being in the group the whole time. We really just want to encourage people to go check out a group and see if it's the right fit for them. And but we also offer a lot of short-term groups here at North Point. And I think it's pretty neat because Keith and Christy, they came to North Point for a very long time, and they were a little bit hesitant to join a long-term group, so they tried a short-term group out first, Marriage Matters. And we've got a lot of short-term group options, and a few that I think are really important that I want to talk about. My absolute favorite environment here at North Point Church is Starting Point. And Starting Point is a safe, conversational-like environment where people are given the opportunity to explore their faith and ask any questions they have about some pretty tricky topics, free from pressure, free from judgment. So I really want to encourage anyone that's here that might be new to church, might be coming back to church after being away for a while, or perhaps just they have some questions or some doubts about faith, God, Christianity. I want to encourage them to really consider checking out Starting Point. And the best time to do that is actually right after this service. We're having a quick 10-minute Starting Point orientation in the Starting Point room located right off the foyer. If you're at all interested in Starting Point, I'd love to encourage you to go check it out. We also offer Marriage Matters, Money Matters, to help people get control of their finances and find some financial freedom. And then we also offer a brand new group this year called Pathfinders, which is a group for parents of children with special needs, because we want them to have a place where they can find encouragement and support while they're going down a path where there's some unexpected challenges. And we also have Next, which is a 3-week group that talks about all the things North Point. Why does this place exist? Why do we do what we do? And helps people take a next step.
It's so cool. I remember a day when none of those short-term groups existed.
Yeah.
It's amazing to see what you and your team have done with it. I feel like our coolest stories come from Starting Point.
I agree, 100%.
All the time. It's just, it's amazing. But if somebody signed up for a group then, because that's really helpful context, what are the kind of expectations of a group member?
If you guys are looking to take a next step into a group and you show up to group that very first night, all we want you to do is we really want you to do 3 things. We want you to show up. I think the most important part of a community group is the community group members. So make group a priority. We want to encourage folks just to join in. I think every single person in this room has a unique perspective and experience that helps each other grow in the community group environment. And then we just want you to be real. I know it's scary to trust others with what's going on in our lives, but there is nothing satisfying like having a place where you are loved and accepted regardless of what's going on in your life.
Yeah, that's all. Have you ever thought about being like a transit or inside out small group leader?
No, I
should consider it. We can talk after this.
You should
This
consider
isn't the place, but we can
leading a
talk
few
after
more
this.
groups for me.
That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, if you come in. Anyways, how do people get a part of a group? What do you need them actually do to?
That's a great question, and I think we've made it easier than ever for people to join a group. All they've got to do is text NP groups to 55222. And actually what I want to do is I want to give you guys a few seconds right now to take out your phones, and I'm going to step you through the process right now. Whether you're looking to join a group or you have questions about joining a group, I would love for you to take out your phones and we'll walk you through the process. So I'm going to give them a few seconds just to get out their phones.
I can be the bad guy and call out people that don't.
Yeah, just point them out. Say, hey, you get out your phone.
Yeah.
I like it.
Keep talking.
This is good. Bad guy, good guy.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
Is that mic giving heavy?
Yes. My arm's sore.
All right, you guys got your phones out? So on this form, we're going to ask you for about 3 different sections of information. First, we ask you for your contact information. And yes, that's my phone number if you want to give me a call. That information is there just so that we know how to get a hold of you and how we know kind of who you are so we can put you in the right group. The next section kind of is where you'll find the different community group options. Just choose the ones that you are interested in. It's okay if you choose more than one. We will have a conversation with you about what's the right fit for you. We do have some women's groups that meet during the day. So if you'd prefer to meet in a daytime group, just say so there. Men, I'm sorry, you cannot sign up for those. And then if you could, choose dates that work best for you. The more dates you choose, the better opportunity we have to get you in the right group. And then finally, actually a few more slides, we have our list of short-term groups, and then we have just some family info that we ask from you guys to continue to help us put you in the right group. Not all of our groups have childcare, but if you need childcare, just indicate as such on that form, and we will connect you with a group that is trying to solve the childcare problem for their group. So we'll put you with other adults that are looking for childcare as well. And then finally, we just want to ask you a few questions about your group experience, or maybe see if you're interested in hosting or leading your own group, because we would love to talk to you about that. And that's pretty much it.
Cool. If people have like immediate questions right now, what's the best thing to do after the service?
If people have questions, or if they don't have a smartphone, they can actually stop by the group's kiosk out in the foyer, and our groups team would love to help them out.
Awesome. Hey, thank you for real, both for coming up here, but more in the bigger picture for what you do. I mean, even personally, you've created groups for me when they didn't exist, when we didn't have a college group. It's had such an impact on my life, and North Point happens in groups. So
It sure does.
You love and lead so many with your team, and so for real, thank you. What
Thank
you do
you,
is so
Jordan.
significant. So thank you guys for being here and being a part of this conversation today. I'd love to pray for us real quickly, and then we can head out of here together. Heavenly Father, God, thank you that you are a relational God. Thank you that you connect with us, that you know us intimately, and that you give us the opportunity to discover who you are as well. Thank you that you've designed us, that we need one another, that we need connection, that we need to rely on one another. And God, I know there's scary parts and whatabouts and what ifs and some pushbacks, but God, would you just put this on our heart in a very real way and give us that kind of boldness, that kind of courage to try something different, God, to engage and just see what you may have in store for each of us. I can't wait to see the stories that happen as a result. We love you. We need you in a significant way, God. It's in Jesus' name that we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you guys so much for being here.
Thank you,
Enjoy the
everyone.
Super Bowl tonight. We'll see you next week.